All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm Paul Crocker. This is Reliability X, one of our weekly webinars. And the topic today is utility levels of service. And I've got a special guest, a longtime friend, Heather Himmelberger from the University of New Mexico Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And Heather, I will let you talk about these. What is Southwest Environmental Finance Center for the people that aren't in the utilities industry? What's your role there, and how long have you been working in asset management for utilities?
And thanks, Paul. And I'm really glad to be here. And Paul and I go back way back in asset management. So it's always exciting to see somebody who learned the world of asset management and has really done amazing things with it. So the Southwest Environmental Finance Center is a program at the University of New Mexico, and we are completely public outreach. So our role at the university is not education or research, it's totally public service. And we have been helping water and wastewater utilities, as well as communities in general, with environmental issues since 1992. And I came in 1994 and took over as director of the center in 1996. So currently I'm serving as director of the center and managing a staff of somewhere around 20 people and multi-million dollars, primarily focused on water and wastewater utilities again, although we do have some air work and some other things going on at our center. And I've been working with utilities and asset management for now well over 20 years. I came to asset management in the early 2000s, like about 2002-ish, and just thought it was the best idea that I had heard in a really long time and really liked several aspects. And the most important aspect is that it's a thinking tool. It is not something that has to include like really serious technology if you're not able to do that, but you can use your brain and that will get you a good bit of the way there. So love asset management, I use it in my life all the time and happy to talk about it with you today.
Yep, I like asset management. It's kind of one of the more favorite things I've learned over the years I've been in utilities. So let's look at the topic side here. Utility levels of service. So how do you define levels of service, or LOS, just to keep it short? And then what key performance indicators are commonly used to measure level of service in utilities?
So I think the biggest thing with level of service is in utilities, we often think that we are in the business of managing assets. So our role is to make the pumps run, to fill the tanks with water, to make sure that the pipes are, intact and the water's moving. And yes, that is important, but that's not why we're in business. We are in business to serve customers. So our whole purpose as a water or wastewater utility is to provide services to customers. And if we didn't have customers, we wouldn't be there. So the way we do that is through assets. And we don't do assets because we like assets. We do assets because we don't know any other way to move water. So as they often say, water doesn't move uphill. So you can't make water go uphill without a pump.
Right.
So we have to have a pump to make it go up the hill. If we could figure out a way to make it go up the hill without a pump, we wouldn't need a pump. Or if we could have it, like, how do you fill a tank without pumping it up to the tank? Again, we have assets because that's the way we choose to deliver service to our customers. But level of service is that part of asset management that makes us remember that we are a customer service business, that we are not an asset management business, we're a customer service business. We manage our assets to provide the service, but first and foremost, we're a customer service. So we have these levels of service goals for that purpose, to be able to again recognize the needs of the customers. So then the next part, which is your second question really, is okay, if we're going to be a public service business, we better know what service they want. So the beauty of water and wastewater is that there are not thousands of things that customers want. There's a few things. So we separate typically between internal and external goals. So an internal goal is something that the utility staff would care about, but your customers are not going to know. So it could be things like lubrication or maintenance related things where, or even reliability related metrics, because I could see, very clearly you could have reliability metrics as part of your level of service, but you're not going to share that with your customers because they're not going to know what you're talking about and they're not going to care. So if we just think maybe now on the external goals, what do customers care about? They care that it's safe. So you're going to have goals related to regulatory compliance, and whether or not you can meet regulations, state and federal regulations. They're going to have goals probably around customer service. So if a customer calls in, how quickly might you respond? You might have goals related to if a thing happens, like a pipe break or something, how quickly might you respond to something like that? Or how soon might you fix it? Or maybe there's only so many breaks in a pipe before you replace that pipe, because customers hate you digging up the street over and over and over again. And we work with utilities all the time that have like 23 breaks in a piece of pipe, or 15 breaks, or 10 breaks. And so your street is just a mishmash of like patches, and they get really mad about that. So you could have a goal around, we're only going to have 3 of those patches before we replace the pipe and, put a new pavement on the road, things like that. Could be related to pressure. Customers care about that. It probably would have to be worded in a way that customers would understand it, but they want that type of thing. Reliability is another big one, that you want to have water 24/7, 365, like 95% of the time or something. You can't guarantee 100% water because stuff happens, but you want to have things like that. So I think those are the kinds of things, around regulatory, public health and safety, around metrics like, pressure, so that it's getting to your home and it's, usable to you, customer service. Those are the types of goals that really matter to customers.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting that, it's a very complicated and asset intensive business, but at the end of the day, all the customer sees is when they turn on their tap, they get water. Or if an industry needs water for a process or doing something, they want to make sure they have the water at the right pressure, and that the water chemistry that the utility provides matches whatever product they're doing. If it doesn't, they typically do some sort of, sub treatment. And so I guess level of service, um, to me, is kind of just defining, hey, for this size of customer, or for whatever this customer needs is, if they have an issue with it, like taste and odor, or pressure or something, that utilities sort of defined a response time to, or a way for them to get that in there and then track that, and make sure that the customer's needs are met. And it is, at the end of the day, it is all about customer service. So um, some very good points.
And the one thing I will say too is sometimes utilities say, well, why do we have to actually sit down and write metrics? Because these are written. This is very clearly written level of service, not just I have it in my head that I'm doing a good job. Like I'm actually writing down, and I have these key performance indicators that I'm going to measure against, because it is very different from having written ones and not.
Right.
So it's very, very different. You might not think it is, but it is. And I would say it's kind of the difference between, where are you today? Are you in Kansas today, Paul?
Right. Yep.
Okay, I'm in New Mexico. So I could get in my car and I could say, I'm headed to Paul in Kansas. That's where I want to go. So my goal is I want to get to Paul. But if I don't have a roadmap of how to get there, I could drive over to California and up to Washington and across Montana and come back down, and I would get to Paul. But it's super inefficient. I'm spending a lot of money on gas. I'm creating an environmental problem because I'm, spewing a lot more stuff in the environment. I could also drive all the way to Florida and up to Maine and over and down. And again, that's not the most direct or efficient. If I write down, I want to get to Paul in the fastest approach that I possibly can, using the least amount of money and using the least amount of gas, now I've set that it has to be the most direct path between myself and Paul. So it's kind of like that, where if you don't put a level of service goal, you're kind of all over the map, because you don't know if you're doing inefficient or efficient things, because you don't track it, you don't check it. So once you start putting down level of service goals and checking them, you can say, I either am or am not efficient, and now I can do something about it. If I'm not efficient, I can take action. I can address that. I can make changes. So again, it's really important to have that written, defined level of service, so you're measuring your performance against something.
Yep. And it's good points too. Joe Anderson, the company's co-owner, talks about efficiency and effectiveness, and he uses the case. Well, I can be real efficient in draining this 55-gallon barrel of oil. All I have to do is kick it over and it's going to drain all over the floor. And he goes, but the question is it the right thing, to do? So you got efficient and effective and you're doing the right things, not just saying, hey, I did that, in 5 seconds when it really wasn't, you created a mess and all these other things. So,
Or even
all
like
right,
you think of a hydrant, we could shut the hydrant off really fast because
right,
that shuts the flow of water as fast as possible. And if we're flushing a hydrant or we're testing a hydrant, we're losing water. Water's going out of the
right,
system most of the time. There's one technology you can get where that doesn't happen, but typically we're just flowing water into the street or into a sewer system or a storm system. And we could say, oh, if we shut it off as fast as possible, then we will have the least amount of water lost because we're shutting it off. But if we do that, we will also create water hammer,
right,
and we could likely bust pump, bust pipe, maybe hurt a pump. We could do damage. So again, like your example, we don't want to do that. We want to shut it off very slowly so we're not creating that water hammer. So again, it is super important. And those are goals you can set of around like working with the fire department so they understand how they should operate the hydrants and so that they can take care of your system because you're not the only one in your system.
right.
There are
That's
other
true.
people that are going to go in your system too.
Right. All right. Let's move on to the next slide here. It says alignment. How can utilities or other companies in generally effectively align their level of service goals with their overall asset management strategies?
And this is where you want to really think about what is the reason you're doing asset management. So you're thinking about what are you trying to accomplish? Like what made you want to go into it? What were your drivers? What is your strategy about? And typically it's about certain things that you really want to accomplish because we have to be practical. We can't have 1,000 level of service goals.
Right.
We want to have a few really good ones that are external and maybe a few more that are internal because typically you're going to have more internal than external goals because customers only care about a finite set of things, whereas as you increase your operation with asset management you can have more internal goals that help you manage things. So what you're trying to do is say, okay, if I want these goals, if this is what I'm trying to do, let's say we'll pick on water one, which is a Kansas utility, and one of the things they say in their mission statement is superior service. So they want to have superior service. That's a mission. So in the mission, superior service, that means, okay, now I got to set level of service goals that would be getting me superior service. So what might that mean? That means I better be responding very quickly to a water quality complaint. That means I better fix broken pipe very quickly. That means I better have very reliable service. So now we can set goals around that. Well, how would that align with asset management strategies? Well, if I have pipe that is super old and breaking a lot, that's probably not going to be a superior service. So I'm probably going to have to then have a strategy that replaces pipe maybe a bit more quickly. It may mean how I staff my utility. So the staffing levels in different departments may change because I'm trying to have this superior quality or superior service. If somebody else maybe says, I've seen other ones, I can't remember what utility it was that said this, said they wanted to have an extremely well-trained staff. So if that's your mission, I mean, there were other things in the mission statement as Water One has other things too, but part of it was about staff and staff training. So now you can think, okay, well, again, in our overall asset management strategy, staff training so that they can best address assets and they can do really good things with managing those assets and maintaining those assets. So now that sets in motion a whole bunch of other things like preventative maintenance is probably going to be really big. And we're going to try to get these folks trained up on that. So we're always trying to figure out, like, if you set a level of service, what assets does that start to impact? And then how do we need to staff and maintain those assets to make sure everything is in alignment? So what you want is that your strategy aligns very closely with what it is you're trying to do overall, with that collection of assets. What am I trying to accomplish?
Right. Yep. For me, it was always big on maintenance stuff because I wanted to make sure we weren't spending a lot of money on emergency repairs, and I didn't like my boss coming asking me why something broke. because most of the time I wouldn't know anyway. It was just some random, failure. So we tried to do a lot of job plans and PMs that were on the right interval. We do oil analysis and vibration analysis and ultrasound, or structure-borne ultrasound on our big motors and pumps, so we knew their condition. And there was one particular motor of a 500 horsepower motor at our collector wheels that we saw a bearing fault two and a half years before we decided to go ahead and schedule a rebuild of the motor. And so, if you can catch those things early, they're not getting you when you're not expecting it, then that helps with your level of service. So if you have
And
all
it
your goals
helps,
in mind. Yep.
if you have a long lead time asset and
Yep.
you're planning it, it's going to really be a big difference than a long lead asset that fails and I'm not ready for it. And all of a sudden my customer service is going to go way downhill because I had this failure. It's caused me to not be able to do what I need to do. And I'm in big trouble and my customers are yelling at me and my bosses are yelling at me. And that's not a fun place to be.
Yeah, and I come from a large, water utility. And so redundancy was always nice to have. We didn't have another water treatment plant for the city. And so having that redundancy and then good maintenance strategies and practices really kept us out of the sort of unplanned events like pumps breaking down and things like that we didn't know about. Let's go to the next one. Best practices. What are some best practices for measuring, tracking level of service across different service categories such as water quality, service interruptions, customer satisfaction? And may have already answered some of these earlier, but anything on there or extra you want to add
I
is
think
great.
the big thing there is just to have a way that works for your utility. So there's a lot of tools out there. So there's simple tools like say Excel spreadsheets that you could use. There are more complicated tools that are getting into an asset management software. And then there's even more complicated tools that you can get into Power BI and all these different things. And it's really just whatever technology works best for you to be able to track it so that it's not going to be super difficult to track, because we don't want to be spending all day tracking our level of service instead of doing our jobs.
Right.
So whatever we're doing, we want to make sure like, and you don't have to be measuring them all the time if nothing is changing. So for
Right.
example, with regulatory goals, we don't measure a whole lot of stuff monthly. So we do monthly bacterial samples, and there's not a whole lot else besides that that's monthly. And then sometimes we do quarterly sampling. Depending on your utility, you might quarterly sample for arsenic or something like that. And then we do some things that are yearly, which we would have things like nitrates would be yearly, and maybe a few other things. And then we do some other things that are like every 3 years. So we don't have to be measuring our regulatory stuff all the time if nothing is changing. We can measure it as things change. So we could measure monthly compliance with the bacteria. We could measure, quarterly with those ones if we have any quarterly samples, and then annual, and then triannual. So we want to be doing measurement that fits the types of stuff that are happening. So let's say we have a goal around how many water breaks we have in a month. So we'll just look every month for how many water main breaks we had, and hopefully we have a place to put that information. If we have a work order system, we would use that. If we don't have a work order system, hopefully we have a spreadsheet or somewhere we could put breaks that have happened, or some kind of database that we would use. So you try to use the tools that are at your fingertips without it being too overly burdensome, and find ways to get that information without making it really, really difficult. And then customer satisfaction is probably the more difficult one, because you're actually wanting to get feedback from your customers in that case. You want to know what they think. So there may be ways that you can do some surveys where you just randomly call some customers, or you can do man on the street kind of things. You could go to the grocery store and say, hey, I'm from so-and-so utility. Would you mind answering a few questions about what you think about my water system, or, the water system
Right.
that serves you? And if they're one of your customers, you could ask them a few questions. So just finding some simple ways. If you have an annual meeting, maybe that would be another way. Try to incentivize it by, we'll do a drawing and you can win a $50 Amazon gift card or something if you come. And just try to get, again, simple ways that will work for you. But the main thing is, how can you measure them that will give you the information without making it super burdensome to try to get that information? And the bigger the utility, the more tools you're likely to have, and the smaller the utility, the more you're likely to use things like spreadsheets and that type of thing.
Yeah, it is. It's important to keep that tracking to the right level, not too much and not every day just because you can. Because I say the main job of utility is to produce quality water, and not just record everything under the sun. So
Yeah, and
um,
most of the time things just don't change fast enough. So if you
no,
were tracking it every day, nothing's changing. So you're going to track a bunch of, you know, probably not even notice if there's a problem. So you really want to look, weekly, monthly, quarterly, what makes more sense? Because if things don't change a whole lot, then you're not going to even notice anything unless you spread out a bit further in time. And again, like, we want you doing, maintenance and operations and customer service, not sitting at your desk, going through piles of paperwork trying to do that type of thing. So we want to be very careful that we're not, overly burdensome in our measurements.
right? All right, let's go stakeholders, I think. How can utility companies balance the need of multiple stakeholders when setting level service targets and prioritizing improvements?
So I think what you have to figure out is, who are your stakeholders? And there may be some stakeholders that you don't think about at first. So I consider the staff of the utility to be a stakeholder. And we don't always think internally. A lot of times what I hear is external. So it's the
Right.
stakeholders are always out there. And I think it's important to remember that we have internal stakeholders, like our staff matters. And when we set level of service goals, we really should be keeping our staff in mind and keeping them healthy and safe as well, not just the customers, but the staff
Absolutely.
too, because customers don't get anything. If the staff is sick and out of work, that's not going to help.
Right.
So like, they're a stakeholder. The elected leaders are certainly a stakeholder. And then you think of like everybody else who's using your system is going to be stakeholders. So there'll be maybe businesses, maybe industries, maybe institutions like universities or places like that. Maybe you have a military base that you provide water to, those types of customers. And I would say for the most part, a lot of those customers that are external are going to be wanting similar types of things. Now, an industry might want a more highly treated water than maybe a general customer, but you can work with that utility to see, is it really beneficial to get everybody treated water that's at that level, or do you just want them to do like some extra treatment? And then with the internal, like thinking of staff, that's where maybe there could be a little bit of balance taking place, because the internal goals may affect external. So we want to think about, do we have the staff to give the customers the goal they actually set? So if you say, I'm going to respond to water quality complaints within an hour, that means staff has to drop everything else they're doing and run out to the customer every time a complaint comes in. And if you're getting 3-4 complaints a day, which hopefully you're not, but if you were, just imagine how disruptive that could be for the staff on a day-to-day basis. So you don't really want to do that, because you are going to have a difficult time with staffing. Or even if you say, we're going to respond to a break immediately, well, first of all, you can't really do that, because you need to call one call, or whatever your version
Right.
of one call is, where you're not going to just dig up the street till you find out what's under there.
Right.
And then the other thing is, we don't want to be so fast that we're hurting the health and safety of our workers. So if they're going to
Right.
run out there and maybe do things they shouldn't, like go in confined spaces when they shouldn't, or not have shoring in a trench if they need it, or not have the safety equipment they need, or not have enough people to safely do it. So where I think the biggest balance is really maybe the internal versus external, and the leadership, where leadership may be kind of in the middle of that, where like they're listening to the customers, but they're not listening sufficiently to the staff to say, well, I can see how you as a political person would want right away, get out there, but us as staff, we can't do that, and here's
Right.
why. So balancing the needs, to me, I think tends to be more about that internal, external, and trying to make sure that you're not hurting one side or the other. On the other hand, we don't want to say you got 3 weeks to respond to a complaint because you haven't had time. So we want to balance the two things and say, okay, you don't get to like put it off forever because you don't want to deal with customers, but you don't have to do it like right this second either. So, trying to work that balance between the internal stakeholders and external, I think, is a really important component of this.
Yep, that's a good point. Um, Challenges. What are the main challenges utilities company face when implementing level of service improvements, and how can they overcome these challenges? I'm guessing it's probably more for the smaller, medium-sized utilities that have problems, but I know big utilities can too, so nobody's really
I would
immune.
say the biggest challenge is convincing them they have to have them. So convincing people that this is an important component is, I think, the biggest challenge, because people don't want to believe that this matters because they've been running their utility for so long without level service goals. It's not readily apparent to them why it is necessary to set them. So that's a main challenge of just convincing people you have to set the goals, they have to be written, and you want to measure whether you met them. The second huge challenge is really trying to figure out like what level a customer wants when we don't have a lot of that data. So you're going to be kind of maybe missing the target at first, and you're going to have to take a bit of time to sort of massage it a bit, because you're not going to always know what customers want right off the bat or exactly what they want. So you can take some time to like try it and then move it over time till you better dial in what the customers want. And the third big humongo challenge is people feeling like they're going to be sued if they set level of service goals and they publish them. And that is not the point of this at all. It is a communication tool, and you need to be very clear with your customers. This is not a contract.
Right.
This is what we're trying to do for you. And I think it can be, I don't know anybody who's been sued about it. Maybe there is somebody, so I won't say I know every utility in the country. So I'm not going to say it's never happened, but it's not something that I typically hear about. So I think it's a little bit of an unfounded complaint. And I think it can also be overcome if you're very careful to make it clear this is our general practices, what we're trying to do for you. We're not guaranteeing you that you're never going to be out of water. We're not guaranteeing you that we will have 24/7, 365, or that we can always address your complaints, within X amount of time. But if you put caveats in your goals, like, well, 95% of the time we will do X, it does leave you an out. And I think you can write them and present them in ways that your customers are not immediately going to sue you over putting out a goal. And again, making it clear it's a goal, it's not a contract. So you're not, and I do not recommend anybody put this in a contract type of way where like, hey, here's my customer contract, because that's not what it's meant to be. It's meant to guide the utility and it's meant to inform the utility, but it's not meant to be like this contractual relationship where they can sue you. So I think, trying to overcome those challenges, a big part of getting to the next step. Once you can get over those and convince people, then setting level service goals isn't that bad. Like, people can come up with things and they can start small, and typically over time they can add to them. So, those are kind of the big challenges, I think.
Yeah, and I think if anybody's interested in that, they can always go to your website. I believe there's some tools on there that
Yes.
are sort of survey questions that they can answer and see where they're at. And if they track those over time, they'll be able to see where they were when they started and, kind of where they ended up.
Exactly.
So lots of good stuff in that. Okay, almost the end here. We got, I think, this one more. Do you have a success story of a utility that significantly improved its level of service through target investments or operational changes? I always think of, like, one that comes to my mind is just what George Hawkins did at DC Water when he came in. The state that, nobody liked the utility, and they found that, well, people will like a lot better if you actually get out and talk to them,
Exactly.
explain what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it benefits them, as opposed to, oh, wait, here's a nice rate increase for you. Sorry, we're not telling you why, but So yeah, if you've got any success stories,
I am going to give a shout out to the city I'm sitting in right now, which is the Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority. So I'm sitting here in Albuquerque, and they started their asset management journey in about 2011, 2012, somewhere in that time frame. It did take them a little while to decide what their level of service goals were going to be. But once they started that process and started measuring them, they have had very many successes and made some really good improvements, one of which was around safety. They had very significant safety injury time, or whatever you call it, where people away, like the number of hours that somebody's out of the job. And I don't remember the precise name for that, but essentially they just tracked how many hours were people out of work because they got injured on the job and then they had to be out, 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it would be. And they thought it was an unacceptably high level, which I think anybody, if you saw the numbers, would agree it was unacceptably high. Too many people were getting hurt. So they sat down with the employees and said, okay, we want to change that. We want to set a level of service goal to reduce that injury time. And then what do we need to do to meet that goal? So now if we set this goal, we can't just set a goal and say, okay, we want, 1/3 as much injury time as we had before, but we're not going to do anything different. Well, okay, that's not going to get it done. So then if you set this goal, of course, at the beginning, you're not going to meet it. So now we can sit down with our employees and say, well, what will we need to do to improve this? Okay, well, we need more PPE available. We need better training on how to be safe. We need to empower employees to say to their bosses, that is an unsafe way to do this job. We need to do XYZ to make it safer. And for them to be able to say, I'm not doing that way. You have to make it safer for me. And they implemented several measures, and they they drove that injury time way, 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 way down. So it made a huge difference for them. And they have lots and lots of different goals. And I think they would say that it has changed their operations significantly. And then I'll just mention there's a couple of utilities or several utilities I work with in Vermont that are all very small utilities. And generally, when you train a small system about this kind of thing, initially level of service is not what they are going to
right?
be super excited about. But we've had a couple utilities where they set some really, simple level service goals, started tracking it, made some huge changes in how they did business around, things like meter reading and metering and that type of thing. There's another utility, not quite so small. We're talking maybe a few thousand as opposed to a few hundred, utility in New York State, that decided to go through the asset management process, set some level of service goals. And as part of that process, they did a whole bunch of customer conversations, and they wanted to also raise the rates. And because they had done so much with customer service around communicating what they were going to provide and what the um, uh, utility was all about and what it needed the money for, they put the rate increase in place and not a single customer complained. So just seeing that, they never dreamed that they could do that without getting people up in arms, but they clearly needed the rate increase to do certain things. And once the customers found out what the rate increase was for and better understood the utility overall and what it was trying to do with its mission and its service, they were able to get the rate increase through. So I think there's lots of people out there who are really making good use of level service goals. Now, not everybody, but I think there's a lot who are, and I
Right.
encourage anybody to take this on. Even if you don't take on all of asset management, try this part and see what you
Yep.
can do with it.
It's an easy enough one to do, and fairly simple. There's no really need to overcomplicate thing or make it complicated
No, not at all. Keep it
because you
simple.
can.
The KISS principle. Keep it simple and sustainable is what I say. We don't use the
Right.
other S. Keep it simple and sustainable.
All right. Let's see here. How might other non-water industries benefit from level of service?
So I
I
think
think
anybody can benefit from level of service, because it's really just about sitting down and thinking about what it is you're trying to do and why. So if I'm any kind of industry, whether I'm, consider myself customer service or not, there's something I'm trying to do. Like, I exist for a reason.
right.
I'm trying to make a product. I'm trying to sell something. I'm trying to treat something. I'm trying to provide you electricity, whatever it might be. You're trying to do something. So you can set goals around whatever it is you're trying to do. And then that starts driving a whole bunch of other things. That starts to drive your staffing needs. That starts to drive, everybody has assets. I'm sitting here in a room and I'm full of assets. The computer, the chair, the desk,
Mhm.
the internet. There's assets galore because there's
Right.
a hub thing up there that's providing me my internet service today. So there's all kinds of assets. Anybody has assets. So once you start thinking about what you're trying to do and what assets you need to try to do it, the level of service goals can come into play no matter who you are, what business, what industry, anything. You can even do it for your own, for your own self. Like, what are
Right.
my level of service goals, say, for my house?
Right.
What am I trying to do? So, even if I don't write down everything and measure it, I do have in my own mind, what are my level of service goals for, like, what I expect my house to do for me, and when do I make the choice to repair this, replace this, versus letting it go the way it is. Like, how much failure can I live with at my house? Do I punt, keep my washing machine that I now have a washing machine that is 31 years old. And every time, I have to say, well, I really like the service that machine can provide. So I will repair it until I can't do that anymore.
Until there's no spare
So, I
parts.
mean, there's all kinds of ways that you can use this in your everyday life. And asset management is like, once you learn how to think that way, you can't not think that way. Like, I can't go back to who I was in 1999 before I had ever heard of asset management because I know too much. I know too many of, like, that is so ingrained in me. And I always tell that to utilities. Like, once you get there, you will never go back. You have to get far enough into it so that your mind can't drift back. But once you
Right.
totally adopt this way of thinking, you can't go back
Right.
because you always are thinking, about these kinds of things as what's more efficient, what's more effective,
Yep.
what am I trying to do? How can I get that done? So I think, it is a change process, but once you've come out on the other side, it's very hard to go back
Right.
because it is a better way of thinking. It is more efficient and more effective way of thinking about things.
Yeah, it's a good communication tool too if you
Hmm.
use it right. To say why we are charging more money for something. It's not just so we can have nicer office furniture or go on longer vacations or whatever. There's a reason for it, and I mean I think in the past, kind of 20 years in the past and before, it would just be a rate increase and customers would have to wonder why wonder why their water rates went up or electric rates or whatever. But I think that communication is crucial, both internally and externally.
Yes.
So, anything else, Heather? I've got one slide here that covers how people can get a hold of you, and I'll give you a minute
Well,
or
we
two
have
if you
lots
got.
of asset management resources that anybody is welcome to use. Everything on our website is completely free and available to anybody. And you probably noticed from Paul and Mai's conversation today, I love talking about asset management. So even if you just want to call and share stories, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm always happy to hear people's challenges, stories, what's worked for you, all of that stuff. So feel free to reach out with questions or whatever. We're happy to try to help.
All right, I got a couple here I've got to do. So for me, I've got one more slide left. If you have any questions of me or Heather, you can always send those to ask@reliabilityx.com. You can email me directly at paul.crocker@reliabilityx.com. Our website is reliabilityx.com. If you're interested in anything asset management and don't necessarily want to buy the standard, but kind of want to see some of the working things that are going on, you can look at the ISO TC 251 committee page. They're always working on new standards. We have two members of Reliability X that are on that committee for the international standard of ISO 55000. And I've got one survey link here. So if you have your cell phone with you and set it on picture mode, you can take a picture of this QR. We have a short, I think, few question survey. As soon as you put in the QR code and follow the link, it'll ask you for webinar code. So it's just 2024_19, and then fill out the questions, and it helps us learn what you like or what you don't like about the webinar so we can make them better. So Heather, I want to thank you for taking the time today to talk about level of service. I think it's been a good discussion and definitely giving some information to people that they may not have before.
Thanks for having me, and good luck, everybody. And like I said, if you have questions or whatever, just feel free to contact me.
All right, thank you, Heather.